everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Triathlon podcast where I talk about all things triathlon. Today's episode we'll be talking about choosing the perfect triathlon race, so stay tuned. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Triathlon podcast where we talk about all things triathlon. I am your host, Coach Gill, and today we're discussing a crucial aspect of triathlon preparation, and that is choosing the right race. Whether you're a seasoned athlete or a newbie to the sport, selecting the perfect race can make a world of difference in your overall experience. Join me as we explore the factors to consider when choosing your next triathlon adventure. I have a number of things to consider when making the right choice. And the first is know your distance, but more importantly, understand your distance, and which distance is right for you is key. So the first step in choosing the right race is determining the distance that suits your current fitness level or goals. And it's more important when you're a beginner than when you're experienced. Once you get in the habit of racing, you'll find that you have a little bit more leeway to decide what you would like to do when, but starting out, you do need to consider your current fitness level. Triathlons come in a various range of distances, and these are super sprint, Olympic, half Ironman, and Ironman. So consider factors such as your training volume, previous race experience, and long-term objectives when selecting the distance that's right for you. So first, let's get to the distances, and that will give you a better idea. So I'm going from shortest to longest, and know that all of these can be I'm not saying easiest to most difficult, because it all goes to the intensity, and you'll understand why. But right now I'm just talking about the distances from shortest to longest. So a super sprint a swim is 400 meters, bike is 10 kilometers, and then run is 2.5 kilometers. And we do consider this probably, if you are a beginner, the super sprint is perfect for you to get your feet wet to see if you even like triathlons. Next is the sprint. A sprint is 750 meters, swim, followed by bike at 20 kilometers, and then you have a 5K run. And again, that's also when I first entered the triathlon world, I did a sprint. That's also a good way to decide if you're even interested in triathlon on the long term. It's not for everyone, triathloning. Next is the Olympic distance, and that is the distance in the Olympics. That's the official distance for the Olympics. That is a 1.5 kilometer swim, a 40 kilometer bike, and a 10 kilometer run. And that is where the intensity or the training hours are going to jump a bit. That's when you are going to find that you'll be making decisions when it comes to training or race preparation and the rest of your life. That's when it enters into your lifestyle. Next is, we can say, a 70.3 half Ironman race. And it's true, it is exactly half of an Ironman. So that is a 1.2 mile swim or 1.9 kilometer swim. The bike is 56 miles or 90 kilometers. And the run is 13.1 miles, which is a half marathon, or you could say 21 kilometers. And there, my friends, once you get to the half Ironman, you are definitely sticking your toe into something. That means you're about to become addicted. Normally, once people finish an Ironman, a half Ironman, the next step is, well, what if I did a full Ironman? I don't recommend doing your first race being a half Ironman, but it happens. A lot of people do that. But know that that will demand a little bit more of a commitment in preparation, race preparation, and I will explain shortly what that entails. And lastly is the iconic Ironman, the full distance. That is a 2.4 mile swim, or rather a 3.8 kilometer swim, followed by 112 miles on the bike, or a 180 kilometer bike ride, followed by a full marathon at 26.2 miles, or you could say 42.2 kilometers. And that requires the biggest commitment of all for training. I have met people who their first triathlon was an Ironman. While it's possible, I don't recommend it. But it's definitely doable. The problem is I just question how much you'd actually enjoy the race, because you'd probably be a little stressed out. But it all goes to your personal preferences now, doesn't it? So if we look a little bit more closely at these race distances, because this is important, the super sprint. It is the shortest triathlon distance, and it's the perfect entry point to triathlon, and it doesn't require too much preparation at first. You need to know how to swim. You should be able to do 4 out and backs in an Olympic size pool at 50 meters. If you can do 4 out and backs, then you know the swim. The bike at only 10 kilometers, that's pretty easy, but you need to know how to ride a bike. But the beauty is, I don't think that you need a particularly special bike you could use. If you just have a mountain bike or a city bike, it's fine to do that if you're new to triathlon and you just want to see if you like it. And lastly, a 2.5 kilometer run. If you have general fitness, I would say maybe you do a little bit, a little bit of training for each discipline once a week. It's not really, I don't think, if you have an overall general fitness, a healthy heart, good knees, I don't think you need to do too much intense training. Next, for the sprint, that's how I got started with the sprint. And with the sprint, it does require a little bit more training and preparation. Again, it's fast. So again, if you did do a super sprint and you're able to swim, you're able to ride the bike, good. You might want to work more and think more about transitions, and also a little bit more training between the bike and the run. So you would do what we'd call a brick session to get used to running off the bike. 20 kilometers, you would notice that if you're not used to it. Again, the sprint is also a perfect entry for triathlon training. And I think there may be a little bit more discipline as opposed to the super sprint when you're training. So maybe 4 to 6 hours a week. Balance out each sport, whichever discipline you're weakest in. Obviously focus on that. For many people, it's the swim. So I do suggest, you should be comfortable. See, with the super sprint, sometimes they have that in pools or there's enough space. But often once you start with sprints and more, if it is open water, then you do need to at least do a few sessions in open water to make sure you're used to it, because some people do sprints for speed and they're very good. So just because it's a short distance, that doesn't mean it's easy. And it can be quite stressful at the swim starts, especially for sprint triathlons and also Olympic, because there are some people who really they're doing it for time. So being used to swimming in open water, either a lake or in the ocean, is good. 4 to 6 hours per week, and start getting used to transitioning, limiting how much time it takes you to transition between each sport. Next is the Olympic triathlon distance. As I said before, it has its name because that is the standard distance for the Olympics. A good time, normally, if you can finish in under 3 hours, that is a good time. And here you are going to have a rigor with the training. And I think it would be maybe, you start training 6 months, 5 to 6 months before the race. And I do think it varies on time, but maybe 6-8 hours per week is good, a good amount of time to prepare for the Olympic distance. Here you'll start to notice that this is beginning to impact your life. And if you have a significant other or family and you decide you want to stick with it, this is the time when you might want to be discussing with your significant other how you might be absent more than usual, especially if you decide to move up to the half Ironman distance. If you do that, that is going to start taking some time out of your normal life. And you'll start to, not only will you be training your regular, and I say probably the same amount of hours as for an Olympic, 6 to 8 hours a week, but you'll also be considering the long, or integrating the long ride and the long run. And so a long bike ride is, now you're doing that on the weekends, that's 2 to 4 hours. So on top of the 6 to 8 hours, you're going to have a long bike ride once every Sunday, maybe a long run. You are starting to intensify, and that's when your absences might be noticed a little bit more with your family. So it becomes a family project. And you should, again, I think you should start training a good 6 months out from that race, assuming that you have a good base of fitness in both swimming, cycling, and running. If there is a week, if really, really it's a lot of work getting from one side of the pool to the other, I would say take a step back and just work on swimming, or the same with the other two. Often it's swimming, and even though swimming is the shortest discipline, it's first. And the beginning of every race, everyone's stressed out, even the pros get stressed out. You want to feel confident and be a confident swimmer. And next and last, for the Ironman, that's a good, I think, a minimum 10 to 12 hours a week training. A lot of people do that, but I do see 10 hours a week as a minimum. I think ideal, perfect would be 15 to 18 hours a week. But you are going to be incorporating, your weekends are shot. If you work for a living, Saturdays and Sundays, or whatever your days off are, you're going to be doing you do need a long ride, every week, anywhere from 4 to 7 hours, and you're going to need longer runs around 2 hours. That doesn't mean just because you're doing this long distance, it doesn't mean you actually have to bike 112 miles on a long ride. You don't, and you shouldn't necessarily do that. Maybe you do that once if it's your first race. You don't have to do that, and you certainly don't, and please don't, you don't have to run a full marathon as part of your training. A half is good for training, but still these things take time. If you want to gradually build up. So you're going to be spending a lot of your time doing the swim, bike, and run, and that should be taken into consideration when choosing what race is right for you. So next, we've covered all the distances that are possible in a triathlon race, and the next thing to consider is location. Location plays a significant role in the overall race experience. Think about whether you prefer a local race or are willing to travel, or not willing, but you want to travel. Research potential race locations and consider factors such as climate, terrain, and altitude. Are you drawn to the scenic coastal courses, challenging mountainous terrain, or flat urban landscapes? Your choice of location can greatly impact your enjoyment and performance on race day. So I would say, if you're going to choose a local race, then some of what I'm going to say doesn't apply. So if you choose a local race, there are a lot of problems that are already, or challenges that are already solved. But if you'd like to travel, don't forget you have to consider the travel time, just getting to the location, housing, food. And when I say food, normally before race day, you want to be careful with what you eat. So when choosing a place to stay, it's always great if there's a kitchen and you prepare your own food. It's fine, after the race, it's fine, eat whatever you want, but you should watch what you eat. You don't want to have a surprise virus or so from something you ate when you ate out the night before, 2 nights before. You don't want to get to the race exhausted. You're already going to be tired, especially if it's a half Ironman or Ironman. You probably will be tired just from the training. So when choosing a location, you're also choosing when you want to arrive, how soon before the race you want to arrive. So how long you're going to be on site. And then what you want to do after, which is more about fun than training. But if there are some people who they like to train up until right before the race, and they just show up, even if it's a 6-hour day of travel. They like to show up right away. Others, like myself, I like to get places, several, 5 days before, get acclimated. That's very personal. It doesn't really matter what you decide. It's more that you've put thought into it, so that you perform well on race day. Next is access to the terrain. So, and when you have access to the terrain, the idea is also to think about what terrain is best for when we consider your strengths and weaknesses. So different races offer varying terrain conditions. And when I say terrain, it's not just about the bike course. That's the first thing we think about, but also the open water swim and the technical running routes. And again, it all goes to your strengths and weaknesses as an athlete, which race is for you. But for example, when we say terrain and talking about open water, if you're out in the sea, in some parts of the world, the sea stays flat. Races are always in the morning. And I can think, in Nice, in France, that's a Ironman that that's near and dear to my heart. If the race starts at 6 a.m., you're guaranteed the water is going to be flat, calm. There's very little waves. It's close to a guarantee. It's just how it is. And it's perfect if that would be your first Ironman, as far as the swim is concerned. Some parts of the world, no, you never know. It might be even at 6 a.m., it might be really rough water, and they're still going to do the race. So you have to be prepared for that. If you don't want to deal with that sort of thing, maybe a race where it's open water in a lake. So lake swimming, probably not as many. You don't have to worry about rough, rugged waves, but there is still an undertow, and there can still be an undertow in lakes. So you have to assess those sorts of things to decide, and it depends on what kind of swimmer you are. If you don't see yourself as a strong swimmer, then you do need to take in consideration what the water is like where the race takes place. And again, of course, for hilly bike courses, that's easy, isn't it? Some people love the hills, and that's me. I like to climb, but only because normally what goes up must go down. So even though there might be a race that's a lot of climbing and that's hard, you get a lot of descents and then you make up the time. Some people love it flat. That's up to you. Although for me, with flat racing, okay, fine, it's flat. You don't have to worry about climbing, but that means your legs don't get a lot of recovery. Again, this is a personal preference, but you need to consider these things before making a final decision. And lastly, technical. Well, for both the bike and the run, what sort of technical challenges will there be? So for the bike, on those descents that I love so much, how many hairpin turns are there? And for the run, does it hug the coast? Is it in the city center? Is it where there are no trees, so it's 100% exposure? Is it on trail? Is it nice, quiet routes? We don't know, but all of those things will affect race day. So do not take the terrain lightly when choosing your race. Next, look at the course logistics. It's essential to, before committing to a race, it's essential to see what the logistics are. Look into factors such as the swim start format, transition area setup, aid station locations, and course navigation. Consider whether the race offers spectator-friendly areas for your supporters, and if there are convenient accommodations nearby. Understanding the course logistics can help you feel more prepared and confident on race day. And it's true, I think that you have to do a few races to see how important it is with spectators. It's pretty important, especially on the run leg. It's great to have a lot of people out there supporting you. Often, if it's a half Ironman or an Ironman, normally on the bike, there are definitely long stretches where there's no one. But for the run, it is good if you have a lot of spectators. And trust me, the accommodations nearby is key. All these races start early in the morning. So you don't want to be far away, so that means you have to get up much, much earlier just to get to the race. And trust me, when the race is done, everybody wants to get home, take a shower, and, kick back. So you don't want, you do want to make sure you have plenty of options nearby. And like I said before, it's best to stay in a part hotel setup where you have control over what you eat. You can go food shopping and make your own food, or an Airbnb, as opposed to having no choice but to go to restaurants for all your food, especially for the longer distances. Now, lastly, I would say you don't want to forget to look at race reviews and assess the event's reputation within the triathlon community. I would say, so if you're going to do Ironmans, it's through Ironman or a challenge, those are very reputable companies. They're not going to be problems, they're not going to be serious problems from one race to the next. But what you are looking for with race reviews are really, there are locals who help with every Ironman or every challenge. So the idea is the little details that maybe weren't appreciated on some of these courses, that might help you make a decision. Sometimes there are problems. Usually there are always enough aid stations. That's not normally something that I hear, but maybe the food at the aid stations there's not a high enough turnover as far as food. So, the bananas are mushy, something like that. Knowing little things where the swim start is and how well that works with once you come out and going back into the bike park. Sometimes I guess my point is sometimes getting back to the transition areas is long. It's a lot longer than you might think. So it's little things that you might hear from other athletes who've done it. It's more not to say that was a good race or a bad race, but to know some of the issues that aren't necessarily obvious before showing up for the race. Well, those are all the things that I have for today. Choosing the right triathlon race requires careful consideration with many factors such as distance, location, terrain, logistics, which I covered. And by evaluating these aspects and aligning them with your goals and preferences, you can ensure a memorable and rewarding race experience. Remember to stay flexible and open-minded as you explore different race options. And most importantly, enjoy the journey of training and racing in this incredible sport of triathlon. Well, that's all for today's episode of the Triathlon Podcast. I hope you found these tips helpful in selecting your next race. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe for more triathlon-related content. And until next time, happy training and race planning. Bye-bye. Bye.